Good evening, and welcome to Lightning Talks presented by the Seattle Aquarium. I'm Jim Wharton. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm the Director of Conservation Engagement and Learning here at the Aquarium. Now, we're coming to you live from the Seattle Aquarium on the shores of Puget Sound in the contemporary and traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. But for our program tonight, we'll be exploring life on the frozen edge. Now, the Arctic in the north and the Antarctic in the south may seem distant from our day-to-day life, but they are critically important to the health of our planetary systems, and they are more rapidly impacted by climate change than nearly any habitat on Earth. Now, survival in these unusual and extreme environments can breed pretty unusual and extreme biological solutions, and that leads to some of the most interesting life forms on the planet. Now, even though these habitats may seem distant and strange, they really need our attention and our care. And we've got 5 great speakers to tell us more this evening. Now, if you've never attended a Lightning Talk event before, here's what you have in store. 5 speakers have 5 minutes each to share one big idea, and not 1 second more. They get warnings at 1 minute. They'll get another warning at 30 seconds, and then at time. And if they go over, they'll get this. Now, we want to keep things moving tonight, so we won't be stopping after each speaker for questions. But if you have questions or comments, please do put those in the chat. We'll be bringing all of our speakers back at the end of the evening for a lively Q&A session. Now, if you enjoy what you see tonight and you'd like to support the Seattle Aquarium, please do consider a donation. When you donate to the Seattle Aquarium, you're joining us in our mission of inspiring conservation of our marine environment. Now, we have a really exciting program tonight, and I'm really excited to get started. So with no further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Kristen Ladra. Now, Kristen is a University of Washington scientist who studies the ecology and population dynamics of Arctic marine mammals, including the impacts of climate change. And Kristen is a Lightning Talks veteran. So welcome back, Kristen.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Are you ready to kick us off?
I am ready, yes.
Slide looks great. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for everyone coming here tonight, and I'm going to talk to you about polar bears in Southeast Greenland. There are 19 polar bear subpopulations in the Arctic, and you're looking at a map of those right now, kind of these different strange shapes with the acronyms that list the name of the subpopulation. They're distributed all over the circumpolar Arctic, and there's in total around 26,000 polar bears across their range. So sea ice is the primary habitat for polar bears. It's really their platform of life. Polar bears use sea ice to travel, to hunt their primary prey, the ring seal and the bearded seal. They find mates and breed on the sea ice, and in some cases, they even build their maternity dens and give birth. All polar bears are losing sea ice habitat due to human-caused climate change. And basically what that means for polar bears is the amount of ice is decreasing, and the amount of time polar bears have to spend time on the ice and hunt seals is going down. And in some cases, polar bears have to spend more time on land, they have to fast, and that can affect their body condition, their reproduction, and ultimately their survival. So we're going to talk about East Greenland tonight. East Greenland is one of the 19 subpopulations, and it's long been considered to be one subpopulation. Nearly all the information collected in that area has been from Northeast Greenland, and it's the longest subpopulation coastline in the Arctic. So tonight's big idea is based on a publication that came out this summer that shows the evidence for a new subpopulation of polar bears in Southeast Greenland. I'm going to walk you through the information we use to outline this: movements, genetics, demography, and ice habitat. So the first research ever conducted in Southeast Greenland happened between 2015 and 2017. We covered the whole area of Southeast Greenland several times in a helicopter and captured 126 bears and observed and biopsied many more. We use that information to look at body condition, health, movements, and genetics of bears and compare that to polar bears elsewhere in East Greenland and the rest of the world. This was a pretty tricky project because Southeast Greenland is very remote. So we placed fuel depots by airplane 2 years in advance, and then we would have to dig them out from 10 feet of snow to be able to fuel our helicopter. So let's talk about movements of bears. The first thing we learned is bears in Southeast Greenland are resident in coastal fjords. They are really home buddies. They like to stay in the same fjord for multiple years at a time, and they rarely venture out onto what we call the pack ice. You see that swirling ice in the image there. That's kind of bad polar bear habitat. Instead, they spend their time in what you see in the upper right, this frozen fast ice that covers the fjords and allows them to hunt seals. So basically, in Southeast Greenland, you have resident bears shown in the red compared to the bears further north in blue that move all over the ice. They live in the fjords on this fast ice. They don't go offshore, but they have something special. They have access to glacial melange, which is freshwater ice from the Greenland ice sheet. So they can use the fast ice when it's available in spring and move to this freshwater glacial ice in summer and fall, which gives them a supplemental habitat. When we talk about genetics of Southeast Greenland polar bears, it's super interesting. They are the most genetically isolated polar bears in the world. If you kind of squint at this map and look at the pie charts, you can see that Southeast Greenland is different from all 19 subpopulations. The genetics show us they've been isolated for at least a few hundred years, and they've always been a small subpopulation. When we talk about demography, which basically means reproduction, we see adult females are small, meaning they have a low body mass, and their birth rates are fairly low, so there are fewer cubs. But we don't fully understand how Southeast Greenland bears make a living in a place with such little sea ice. So there's a lot to learn about how they live in this fragmented habitat. And speaking of habitat, these fjords are sea ice free for most of the year. So bears that live in Southeast Greenland only have around 100 sea ice covered days to hunt. And that's really what we project for the Arctic in the late 21st century. So how do these bears survive? They survive because of this very unique habitat offered to them by the Greenland ice sheet, this floating landscape of freshwater ice, which also supports seals and allows them to hunt during times when there's no sea ice. Now, what does the future look like for polar bears? The most important thing we can do is have climate action. Most polar bears in the Arctic don't have freshwater ice, unlike Southeast Greenland. And this work is based on a paper published in Science with a whole lot of scientists that added to the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kristen. You just made that underwire. It's a great way to start. I'm wondering, when you said that those polar bears are sort of specific to that area and don't move much, do you think as the climate changes and it changes the conditions in Greenland, do you think that you'll see more movement between populations?
I think as we lose sea ice, bears are going to become more isolated. So in Southeast Greenland, as sea ice continues to disappear, those bears will have even fewer options to move out of those fjords.
So I think that your presentation, I know, is going to spark a lot of questions from our viewers. So viewers, if you have those questions, please do put them into the chat and we'll bring them back when Kristen rejoins us at the end of the program. Thank you again, Kristen.
Thank you so much.
Now, our next speaker is Lisa Lidges. Lisa is a conservation education liaison and the coordinator of the St. Louis Zoo's Wild Care Institute's Arctic Socio-Environmental Program. That does not fit on a name tag. Lisa, are you ready to go?
I am.
All right. Your slides look great. Take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me this evening. In 2013, the St. Louis Zoo began to develop the messaging for our new polar bear habitat, McDonald Polar Bear Point. We knew we wanted the messaging to result in meaningful and productive conversations about climate change and climate change mitigation. But we wanted to do something different from the messaging zoos were using at their polar bear exhibits at that time. Through mutual colleagues at the National Museum of the American Indian, the Smithsonian Arctic Study Center, and the Alaska Nanook Commission, we learned about the First Voices messaging technique, where Indigenous people shared their cultures and their stories from their own perspective. In the US, Alaska Native people have lived and interacted with polar bears for thousands of years. So who better to participate in meaningful conversations about polar bears and climate change than them? We spent more than a year having conversations with Alaska Native communities who were interested in working with us. We spent a lot of time listening, learning, and getting comfortable being uncomfortable at times. These conversations became the building blocks for authentic partnerships and long-term relationships built on mutual trust and respect. Through these conversations, the messaging at Polar Bear Point, the main mechanism for the messaging, and how the zoo can best support the communities were co-developed and co-designed. These are the messages at Polar Bear Point. These are the guidelines our educators follow when working to connect our guests to our Alaska Native partners, which is no small feat. At a zoo, educators are taught to tell the animal stories to connect them to our guests. At Polar Bear Point, our Alaska Native partners tell their stories for themselves, and our educators' main role is to build a bridge between our guests, our polar bear, and our Alaska Native partners. The mechanism that everyone agreed upon is a video journal that is based on 3 intentionally general themes, so each village that wants to make one can truly make it their own. What life is like where you live, what your life is like related to nature and polar bears, and how life is changing. The video journals are created by the village youth who receive media and journalism training through our partner, the Alaska Teen Media Institute, a nonprofit organization based in Anchorage. The students create everything for the video journals. They write the questions, they conduct the interviews, run the sound, take B-roll, and even recruit the interviewees. Everything that is collected for the video journal, including the final video that is approved by the tribal council, belongs to the village and not the zoo. When you watch the video journal, you will not see the St. Louis Zoo logo on it anywhere. We share it at the zoo and on our YouTube page and our website with the village's permission. You can view the 2 approved video journals at stlzoo.org/Alaska. The key assets from the zoo side of things included an audience to which we can amplify our partners' perspectives and messages, and educational programming for the students in the villages. Our visits to our partner villages include a variety of customized educational programs that we are able to facilitate with the school and tribal council support. Our programs support grade level expectations while also focusing on potential STEM and field biology career pathways. Where are we now? After Polar Bear Point opened, the zoo began its true investment into this work and these relationships. We continue to give funding year after year to our partner villages, and eventually this work was placed under the zoo's field conservation branch, the Wildcare Institute, to explore what other ideas and projects we could do together. We had several exciting projects start and some in development, like our first paid intern from one of our partner villages, new interpretive materials for Polar Bear Point that feature the voices of students, and then March of 2020 happened. We had to take a major step back while our partner villages dealt with the devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the zoo, we were grounded for 2 years, over 2 years, as the St. Louis Zoo and the St. Louis Zoo community dealt with COVID-19. Thankfully, we are able to travel again and just returned from our first trip back to one of our partner villages since 2019. It was a wonderful trip. And even though we're in the process of building back from where we were, because our relationships are built on mutual trust and respect and the zoo's long-term commitment to these relationships, we aren't starting back from zero. More travel is planned for the spring, and we are so excited to get the rebuilding process going. Thank you so much for having me tonight, and I look forward to your questions and our discussion in just a little bit.
Thank you, Lisa. Drop that right in on 5 minutes, just like you designed it. So, Lisa, I'm curious. This is such a fantastic approach to thinking about a zoo or aquarium exhibit design process. Has it influenced the way that you've developed other exhibits or other areas of the zoo away from Polar Bear Point?
Yes, and it's really helped us be a lot more intentional about the way that we make those connections with our guests. So, connecting with the animals is obviously so important and so key and essential, but making sure, especially when we're talking about conservation, that we're looking at the whole picture. So we're looking at the human aspect, we're looking at the field biology aspect, and then the way the zoo can contribute. So what we call ex situ and in situ. So it's really helped us look at all of those different factors when building new exhibits and how we want that messaging to really reach our guests.
Yeah, I think that's such a smart strategy. The St. Louis Zoo has been one of the leaders in that movement around a One Health approach, thinking about animal health and human health as sort of the same instead of so separately as we have in the past. Well, Lisa will be back at the end of the program for Q&A, so please do continue to put your questions and comments into the chat. Thank you very much, Lisa. Our next speaker is Jess Phillips from the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore. Jess is the Penguin Coast Area Manager at the zoo and works with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums Safe Penguin Conservation Initiative. Are you ready to tell us more, Jess?
I'm ready.
All right, your slides look great. Take it away.
Great, thanks. And thanks for having me, guys. So we're going to talk about penguins, which is obviously an iconic species, polar species. But you can learn a few things about them that you might be surprised about. So let's talk quickly about penguins, because I don't think that some people don't know too much about the different species. There's actually 18 different species of penguins. If you look real quick on this picture, there's only 17. I know you can count really fast. This species right here, the rockhopper, there's actually a northern and southern species. So 5 of these species of penguins are in the endangered class, and another 5 are vulnerable right now. And the thing you'll be really surprised to know about is none of these penguins are actually polar species. Penguins live more than just in the Antarctic area. As you can see by this map in the blue here, they all live below the equator, so they never do meet polar bears like on the Pepsi commercials. But you can see that they live not just in the Antarctic, but also Australia, New Zealand, Africa, and on the coast of South America, as well as other islands. So we're actually going to talk about the species that's not a polar species, and that's African penguins, are the ones I work with. But the thing that you're going to kind of learn about is that both African and Antarctic penguins are connected by an ocean current, and they both suffer the same threats due to global warming and climate change. So this is the coast of South Africa right here, and the green line is Namibia is on the left here, and South Africa is on the left, on the south. And this is the area where the African penguins live. So they're African black-footed penguins. And the reason they're there is this blue line here, the cold Benguela Current. And this comes all the way up from the Antarctic. And the reason that the penguins are here is because this cold water and this current brings lots of pelagic fish, so lots of shoals of sardines and anchovies. However, due to climate change, this current has started to drop low, and this is causing a lot of problems with these penguins. Right now, the main issues that are affecting these guys is severe weather events, habitat loss, and prey shortages. And these are exactly the same things that are affecting Antarctic penguins as well. So right now, as you can see with these numbers, it's pretty drastic in Africa. As I meant, African penguins are endangered. And 100 years ago, there were over 2 million pairs of these penguins. Right now, the population has dropped down to 0.06% of that population. And we only have about 14,200 breeding pairs remain. And if we don't do something about it soon, they're going to be extinct by 2035. So what's affecting these African penguins, like I mentioned, is affecting Antarctic penguins too. Here's a few things that we are dealing with and we work with. So heat exposure is very, very a big deal. And you think, well, it's Africa, so it's hot. They've had a lot of excess heat days. Just this year, they've had 8 additional days that have been over 95 degrees, which still doesn't sound hot, but for these guys, it is pretty bad. They're dealing with habitat loss, so most of the time they're exposed. So these chicks you can see here are overheating. The parents overheat. And the problem is because they get so hot, eventually they end up going into the water to cool off, and they abandon the chicks and eggs, and they have to be collected and saved. The warmer ocean temperatures are moving the fish down south. Flooding and fire is an issue, and there's an increased risk of disease. And these are a few things that we're doing to try and help them right now. And that's creating artificial nest boxes that are known to have better temperature control. Early warning weather systems. So if we know there's going to be hot weather coming, we can start monitoring the nests a little more and watching out for the abandoned chicks. And, we're doing a lot more increased monitoring. There's also a lot of work going on with the fishing industries to try and cause moratoriums around the colonies and to try and stop, to increase the amount of fish that are there. So I'm going to stop before I am out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Don't be afraid of the lightning. It's all right.
I don't want to get wet.
Hey, Jess, what this is, the Western penguin or the West African penguins are, it sounds like it's an acute conservation issue. And I know that AZA institutions are all in to try to make a difference with these particular populations. What can our viewers do to help out with these efforts?
The best thing you can do really is to help us and donate to SAFE. SAFE stands for Saving Animals from Extinction. It's an AZA program. So African penguins are one of those key species that really help. So they can donate to directly to AZA, or they can donate to Safe African Penguin. We have a website that I can post the initiative. And basically all that money goes to different projects that are helping the penguins over there.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Jess. Now, remember, if you have questions for Jess, put those questions into the chat. We'll be back in just a little bit to have a nice Q&A. So keep those questions and comments coming. Thank you very much, Jess. Now, our next speaker is Arlie McCarthy from Polar Alien Hunters. It's a team thinking about the impact of invasive species in polar regions. Now, Arlie's also a postdoctoral researcher at Helmholtz Institute at the University of Oldenburg. Take it away, Arlie.
Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about polar alien hunters and give you a tale of what I do as a polar alien hunter. But to start off with, what is a polar alien hunter anyway? So I think of it as anybody who makes an action or a decision to do something to help prevent alien species becoming a problem in polar regions. And for me, I'm an Antarctic marine biologist, so my focus is on marine invasive species in Antarctica. Now, if you were thinking that Antarctica is isolated and extreme, you'd be right. Antarctica is the coldest, windiest, driest, highest, and least populated continent in the world. In the ocean, this means the isolation comes from physical barriers, and these are in the form of ocean currents that circle around Antarctica and make it really difficult for anything to cross into the Southern Ocean. Obviously, whales and seals and bigger animals can do that quite well, but critters like barnacles and other things that might live on a ship or in our coastal rocky shores find it very difficult. Also, if they make it to Antarctica, it's really cold and icy. So there's nowhere in Antarctica that doesn't get icy in winter. And most things that have lived outside Antarctica struggle to survive in those conditions. So, marine aliens, are they a problem? What do we know about them? What are they even? So they're things that could mistake a ship for a rock or a rock for a ship and travel around on those ships. There are no confirmed populations of non-native marine species in Antarctica yet, but we do know that human activity is changing this. So through climate change, those physiological barriers are being lowered. And this might make it possible for new things to inhabit the environment. So by the end of the century, there will be less ice, it will be warmer, and this might make it possible for non-native species to live there. This is particularly true for the Antarctic Peninsula, which is the bit that juts out towards South America. But human activity also brings things to Antarctica that couldn't make it there themselves. So ships are the main way that marine invasive species could get to Antarctica. And what might take 3 years floating on the ocean currents to get to Antarctica, again, for things that aren't whales and birds and seals that can swim very well, so this journey would only take 1 week by ship. So suddenly it becomes possible for a lot of these organisms. But we need to know something about the ships to know anything about what the risk is of alien species being brought to Antarctica. We need to know where the ships come from, therefore what species they might bring with them, what routes they take, and where they go. And so I have studied the ship traffic network for Antarctica and found that ships travel from everywhere. Every dot in this map is a port that is connected to Antarctica via ship traffic. Now, most activity is around the Antarctic Peninsula and coming off South America, but really, Antarctica is connected to the rest of the world by ships. And we also know that most of this ship traffic is going to the Antarctic Peninsula. And of the top 20 places that I found were high at risk because of ship traffic, 19 of these were in the Antarctic Peninsula or nearby islands. So where does that leave us? It's an emerging issue, which means thankfully there's maybe still a little bit of time to do something about it. Antarctica is more connected than we thought, so it requires an effort from everyone. And we know that it's ship activity and climate change together that increase the risk, so we need to address both. And we also know that both factors are more intense around the Antarctic Peninsula, which means that we can perhaps prioritize those areas. Now, I just want to say thanks for listening, and anyone can be a polar alien hunter, whether or not you visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlie. One of the things I love about this particular conservation initiative is that it's not waiting for a problem to be out of control. It's actually paying attention before we have a problem to worry about. So fantastic initiative. Now, Arlie won't be joining us tonight for Q&A, but if you have questions for her or her talk, you can find her at the Twitter handle that we're about to drop in the chat, or you can send a message to the Polar Alien Hunters webpage, also in the chat. Now, our final speaker for the evening is Bryn Devine. Bryn is an Arctic fisheries advisor for Oceans North, working on sustainable fisheries management and conservation of Arctic marine ecosystems in Canada. Are you ready to bring us home, Bryn, with a talk on Greenland sharks?
Ready to bring you home here, Jim.
Excellent. Let's see. Your slides look great. Take it away.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. And again, thank you to everyone for tuning in. So this evening, I am going to very quickly tell you about the Greenland shark and why we really need to know more about this incredible species. So when you think of a shark, you're probably thinking of one of these species on the left here, something in warm, shallow water that has all of your typical shark traits. It's probably sleek and fast and agile. You probably don't think of something quite like the Greenland shark, which is certainly not your typical shark species. They are one of only a few polar sharks capable of withstanding sub-zero temperatures and living in ice-covered waters. Although they are quite different from these other sharks, pretty much in every way possible, they are an amazing species. So I'm going to start by sharing a bit more about them before jumping into what more it is that we really need to know. So Greenland sharks are one of only 17 species in the family Somniosidae, which is Latin for sleepy or sluggish, hence the common name sleeper sharks for this group. And true to their name, Greenland sharks have some of the slowest recorded swimming speeds relative to their body size for any fish species. They are the largest fish in the Arctic, with females reaching lengths over 16 feet, so they do get quite big. And if you've ever seen a photo or video of these sharks, you may have noticed they're very fancy eye accessories. Nearly all Greenland sharks are host to these copepod parasites that attach to their eyes. These parasites can cause significant damage to the eyes, and as a result, it's believed that most Greenland sharks have really poor vision. Greenland sharks are found primarily throughout the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. However, there have been some sightings of large sleeper sharks in places like the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, which may very well be Greenland sharks. They can be found both inshore in coastal waters and offshore, and to a depth of over 8,000 feet. And despite their slow swimming speeds, tracking studies have shown that these sharks are quite capable of making really long distance movements in excess of 900 miles. As for their diet, we know they eat a wide variety of prey items, mostly fishes, but also things like crustaceans and squids, adults possibly even seals. But like many deep sea sharks, they are well-known scavengers, so they will take advantage of any carcass that might find its way to the seafloor. Historically, Greenland sharks were actually the target of a very extensive liver oil fishery that lasted for centuries and even continued until the 1960s. Since then, although there are some small harvests in places like Iceland and Greenland, most Greenland sharks caught today are a result of accidental bycatch in many northern fisheries. As some of you may have heard, Greenland sharks have some pretty remarkable life history traits. They are believed to be very slow growing, late to mature, and most notably, they could be the longest living vertebrate species on the planet, with lifespans estimated to be 250 years or more. Unfortunately, these remarkable traits are also what makes them particularly high risk to overfishing. In fact, in 2020, Greenland sharks were designated as vulnerable by the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. And this designation was largely due to these life history traits, but also combined with past and present fishing pressure. But now what I really want to impart with you all are what are some of the things that we don't know about Greenland sharks. So first up, and this is a big one, how many Greenland sharks are there even out there? We currently do not have accurate estimates of Greenland shark abundance throughout their range, which as you can imagine, this is really crucial information for monitoring the health of a population. We also have many lingering questions regarding their reproduction. For example, where are their mating grounds located? Where do they go to have their pups? How often are they reproducing? And when they do reproduce, how many pups do they have per pregnancy? To date, there's only ever been 2 observations of pregnant females. So there's still a lot of uncertainty on how many pups each female can produce, which is really important for understanding population growth. And finally, there are still many unknowns about their movement ecology. We know that they can make these long distance movements, but do they make regular migrations between the same places? Do all sharks make these long distance movements? Or maybe there's different populations with different movement patterns. So a lot of questions, and this will require a lot more tracking studies to try to answer these. So why are these particular unknowns such a problem? Each of these knowledge gaps makes conservation planning really challenging, as the answers to these specific questions are needed so that we can accurately address the bigger question of whether or not the current bycatch rates will lead to a continued decline of Greenland sharks. As long-lived, high-risk bycatch species that undoubtedly play a really important role in both Arctic and subarctic ecosystems, there's really an urgent need for research to tackle these unknowns so that we can ensure protection of this truly amazing but very bizarre polar shark. And with that, I will send it back to Jim. Thank you all for watching. I don't want to get the lightning bolt.
And we're lightning free this evening. Good job, Bryn. Greenland sharks are endlessly fascinating to me. Every time I think about something, it's like everything from the copepods, which make my eyes itch just to think about them. Someone had mentioned, and we're about to jump into chat, but the fishing of Greenland sharks, it's mostly bycatch. Like people don't want to eat Greenland sharks, right?
So there is some subsistence harvest for human consumption in places like Greenland and Iceland. If anyone's been a tourist to Iceland, it's a pretty popular thing to try Greenland shark. But in proportion to what's caught as bycatch, it's much less, and certainly nothing to the extent of the liver oil fishery that happened in the past.
Well, thank you, Bryn. This time, Bryn isn't going to go anywhere. We're going to bring all of our speakers back to the screen. So this is your opportunity to ask questions to any of our speakers about any of their topics or stuff that's related. So continue to drop those in the chat, and I will feed them to our speakers as we go. I've got a couple of sort of top of mind that I'd like to ask you all. But first, I want to ask, do any of you have questions for each other?
Actually, I do for Bryn. So I'm from the UK, and I remember as a kid seeing Greenland sharks off the coast of the northeast of England, and we were warned never to go touch them because their skin is toxic. Is that true?
Ooh, the skin wouldn't be toxic if you touched it, but if you eat large quantities of the flesh, if it's raw, it has been noted to cause sort of drunkenness, so they call it. As some of the sled dogs that would eat it kind of act like they're drunk. So in high quantities, the raw meat is mildly toxic.
Cool.
But you can touch them.
Okay.
I read somewhere in the annals of my, like when I was a little kid and was reading all the shark books, that there is actually either Alaskan or other language word that means that is like related to drunkenness, that means shark sick.
Oh,
Does that sound familiar?
that does sound familiar.
That's probably one of those nuggets that came out of a book that had exactly zero research behind it. But it is one of those things that stuck in my little kid brain. Speaking of questions that everybody needs an answer to, Kristen, polar bears are incredibly amazing animals. But one of our young viewers, Ito, needs to know, are they bigger and more powerful than a grizzly? Like, how do you, like, it's tough to get a scale for a polar bear because every time you see a polar bear, it's sort of alone on an ice floe. How impressive are these animals up close?
Yeah, so the polar bear is the largest bear in the world. They are bigger than grizzlies, but I would say personality-wise, polar bears tend to, if they have the option, keep to themselves, whereas grizzlies are often much more aggressive. And when you see, for example, the two of them together, the grizzly is the one that chases the polar bear away. So they have they're different in that sense, but the polar bear is larger physically.
Interesting. And Bryn, the size of the Greenland shark is something that's also interesting, but it grows so slowly, takes so long to grow, gets so old. Somebody was asking, like, I've seen estimates anywhere up to 400 years, right, for some Greenland sharks. So how do you know? Like, there wasn't anyone around to measure a 400-year-old Greenland shark. So, like, how do we know they get so old?
So that's a great question. So traditional aging methods for more, I guess, your classic shark species, they often use the vertebrae that, like counting rings on a tree, you can section it and count the growth rings. Things are a little bit weird in the deep sea. So for deep water sharks, that isn't a method that we can use because you need some sort of hard structure that's present at birth. The authors who did this study, Julius Nielsen, as part of his PhD research, they had to find a hard structure that was present when the sharks were born, and they used the eyelids because Greenland sharks don't have any spines or anything else that could be used. So the eyelids are formed at birth. So they were able to use radiocarbon dating to get those estimates of age.
So that's fascinating. One of the things that all of these animals have in common, and probably even the Greenland shark, is just the impact of climate change. Climate change is impacting polar bear ranges, their food availability, penguin food availability. Lisa, when you were talking and when you were collecting those conversations with those Alaskan communities, like how did the topic of climate change come up, and was it at all related to their relationship with the polar bears?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. I zipped it in there, but one of the themes of the video journals, one of the questions that the students formulate their interview questions around is, how is life changing? So we don't actually ever specifically say, could you ask questions about climate change? They don't. But as soon as somebody asks, how is life changing, or what changes have you noticed, they always go direct to climate change and the effects of climate change, and how they see bears and see less bears in some of the villages that we work with, and see less ice. And so how that ice affects their ability to hunt and fish for their subsistence, and the ability for polar bears to find their prey as well.
So that the impact of climate change, it seems like it manifests in so many different ways. Jess, someone was asking, how does climate change affect the disease risk for penguins?
Yeah, well, obviously that's a good question because you don't really think too much about that. But one of the big diseases that affects penguins is avian malaria, and that's a mosquito-borne disease. So obviously, as temperatures rise, mosquitoes are around a lot more than they used to be. So the avian malaria has become more prevalent just because it's affecting penguins even more and more all year round, as opposed to it just being seasonal. The other thing is with the warming, they are more susceptible to nematode infestations, like parasites that get into the nest areas, and that can really affect the chicks, and causes emaciation and lots of health problems that way. I'm not so 100% sure about what's going on in the Antarctic, but I'm sure that's going to start affecting them too more. And also, avian influenza has become more and more of an influence with penguins. It's been hitting them very hard.
Yeah, it's like climate change is an insidious sort of influence on these ecosystems and the lives of these animals, and in some cases, it's like causing direct effects. And other times, like with the disease risk through mosquitoes, it causes things to amplify risks that were always sort of present there. Kristen, when you're talking about the bears in Greenland, how are their food sources, the seals? Have they been impacted by climate change as well?
Yeah, I mean, every species in the Arctic is impacted by climate change because they're all specialists that have learned to live in this really unique system. So we don't have very good handle on how seal numbers have changed in Greenland, but there's no doubt that the loss of sea ice affects species like ring seals and bearded seals that rely on that ice to be present, to give birth to their pups and nurse their pups and wean their pups. And even some subarctic seals that specifically swim to very specific regions of Greenland to do the same, to give birth. So, the whole system is changing. And when you just try to look at one animal and how one animal might be affected, it's too simplified. You really have to look at the whole Arctic.
When, Bryn, there's a couple of questions, speaking of things that animals eat, about that Greenland shark. I think people are fascinated by the fact that this is an extremely slow shark with compromised eyesight. So what is it eating and how is it managing?
So I should say, I mean, they're most commonly found in very deep water where there's not a lot of sunlight anyways. So you really don't need to have great eyesight. They have some of the largest olfactory receptors, or the sense of smell receptors, in their brain relative to other fish. So they have an excellent sense of smell and rely quite heavily on that. They eat, I think, pretty much anything they can get their mouth around. Fish seems to be the most common part of their diet. It's a bit of a mystery on the seals. Like you say, they're so slow, and seals are quite fast prey. There are some theories that they might use an ambush approach when seals are remaining in the water to avoid other predators we talked about here, like polar bears, and maybe able to sneak up on them. But it's not something that's been observed directly, so certainly a lot more to learn about them.
And is it one of those old shark book nuggets that there was a reindeer found in the stomach of a Greenland shark before?
Yes, there has been reindeer remains in Newfoundland. There was a poor shark that was found struggling. It had choked on a moose leg or something, and some very friendly Newfoundlanders helped it dislodge the moose leg and sent it on its way. So,
that's a feel-good story.
Yeah.
It's a little weird, but it feels good. Lisa, when you just got back from a visit. So could you see, changes in those communities that you visited based on the last time you were there?
Yes. One of the biggest things that is of kind of top of mind has been the extreme weather events that have been happening due to climate change. And we actually, even in just the 8 years that we've been traveling to rural Alaska, Northwest Alaska, the storm season is typically in like late September, early October, and it just keeps going longer and longer. Like the entire month of October now is stormed so bad that planes can't get out, and it crashes up against the shoreline. And so it's causing erosion and causing all of these big issues. So this broadening of the storm season has become a real issue just in the last few years.
Kristen, when you're out and sampling those polar bears, the extreme weather would have to influence y'all's ability to do any of that work, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if we have a month-long field season, I would say at least half the days we can't work because the weather is poor, and that's compounded by doing work from a helicopter. So most of the polar bears that we capture biopsy, we use a helicopter to locate them on the sea ice, and then land the helicopter on the sea ice next to the bear. And you just have to have really good, stable, clear weather to be able to do that. So, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, Jess, one of the advantages of zoos and aquariums contributing to conservation work is that we can learn a little bit about the biology of these animals without having to go in the field. Like, what have you all learned through your care of those animals at the Maryland Zoo and elsewhere throughout AZA that's helped with the conservation efforts of those animals in the wild?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate here at the Maryland Zoo to have the largest colony of African penguins in North America. So we have over 100 birds. So we can do we do a lot of studies that help the birds in situ, and we work with an organization called SANCOB, which is a rehabilitation organization. So we help them with medication studies for malaria. We also do a lot of studies about molting, and if they have questions, that we have this captured population here that we can really study and work with. And it works on the other side because we have experience with the penguins and keepers raise chicks. They actually travel to SANCOP and help them in the busy times of the year to help raise chicks. So it's kind of a good trade-off between the two of us. We certainly learn from them, and we help them whenever possible as well. So, and we try and share our information as much as possible. And we share, we don't keep all of the chicks that we breed here at the Maryland Zoo. We share them with other zoos and aquariums within the AZA to keep the breeding genetics going on. So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Jess, I know some zoos and even some aquariums now have been participating in conservation breeding programs to try to bolster the populations in the wild. Do you think that that's in the future for penguins, breeding chicks or eggs in human care and transporting them to their wild settings?
So they're talking about doing a pilot program in South Africa with zoos in South Africa, and hatching eggs. They would actually, the eggs would be laid, and then they would be sent to, say, SANCOB to be incubated and hatched, and then the hope is to see how they go. I think we would be a long way down the road for us to send birds out, and part of that is just because I think there's a lot of concern about the genetic diversity here in the United States with the birds, to make sure that it would affect the populations in the wild. But it's certainly there's been success with other species of animals, so it's certainly not something that we're ruling out. But you really have to kind of fix the problems that are going on there, right, before you're putting other birds, animals out into the, yeah.
Just has the range for the penguins shrunk?
What's interesting is so Namibia, the penguins up in Namibia actually, they were the first to really suffer from the lack of fish, and because the Benguela current started dropping, the issue is that the humans still go out and fish, and they still want to collect the same amount of fish there are. So if there's less fish, the people are catching them, then there's less fish for the birds, so they start starving. The Namibian penguins have learned to start eating other kinds of fish that they call trash fish, or like goby, which is something that people don't want to eat. They eat squid because those pelagic fish are just not there anymore. The birds in South Africa are being a lot slower to learn this. And they are actually the ones that are really suffering big time and losing. The population has dropped so much. The Namibian population is actually fairly stable, but they're still dealing with a lot of other issues as well. But the lack of food is really the number one issue that's going on. So there's a lot of work trying to figure out what we can do to help.
Well, that's interesting that you're seeing some shift in their prey selection. Some obviously some populations seem less flexible in that. Of course, there's this. We think about the residents here in Puget Sound, and they're You also have orcas who are mammal eaters. You have the southern residents who are fish eaters. And it seems like there's plenty of, you just can't, the orca's just not going to switch. So it's interesting to see a little bit of flexibility there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, we've tried to tell the Namibian birds to go to South Africa and tell their relatives how to eat, but it's not working very well.
Like an outreach program. Perfect. So speaking of ranges, I mean, I'm boggled by what the range of the Greenland shark actually is. Because I've also seen those reports of Greenland sharks in the Caribbean, which doesn't fit at all. So like, are those animals just on walkabout, or like, what do you think the range of the Greenland shark might actually be?
I think it could probably be quite large. So in the Arctic, they tend to inhabit a bit shallower waters, and a common trend in other species as well. Closer to the tropics, they inhabit deeper water. So a lot of the observations around the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, these sharks are seen very, very deep. So they could be quite common, quite prevalent in that area, but there's just not a lot of activity in those deeper waters. So our chances of encountering them just are not the same as they are further north. So, I mean, there's at least maybe 10 reports in the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean area. So I think they could have a quite broad distribution. And I say they were likely Greenland shark because there is known hybridization. So in the Pacific, Jim, you're probably familiar with the Pacific sleeper shark over there on your side. So there is some evidence of hybridization between the two species. And so they've found some of the genetic samples from the sleeper sharks in the Gulf of Mexico were actually hybrids of Greenland shark and Pacific sleeper shark. So without those genetic samples, we can't say definitively if they were Greenland sharks. It could be hybrids, but I do think they probably have a quite extensive range.
So as we start to wrap up, I want to end on thinking about, we're talking about, communities in Alaska. We're talking about polar bears, penguins, Greenland sharks. I want to end kind of on a hopeful note. So, like, Kristen, when you look at that population, this is, a population of polar bears that are living in sea ice conditions that are likely to be common in other areas. Those other areas may not have the same sort of freshwater ice sheet advantages that these polar bears do. But has studying this particular population made you feel more hopeful for polar bears in other areas?
Not really, no. I would say, the most important thing we can do for polar bears is do something about our greenhouse gas emissions and get a handle on climate change. And I say not really, not to be a pessimist, but I think that most polar bears in the Arctic have access to sea ice or land. And if you take away the sea ice, a polar bear can't really be a polar bear. So we really need that sea ice to stick around to be able to support those populations. What we learned in Southeast Greenland is this small group of bears that has access to this fairly unique habitat, might have the ability to hang on for longer. But at the same time, the Greenland ice sheet is changing. There's a lot of melt happening. Glacier margins are changing. So, everything. It's not just the sea ice that's disappearing in the Arctic. It's also
Right.
the freshwater ice. So, the most important thing we can do is have climate action for polar bears.
And that's important to understand. Like, it's important to understand what needs to be done, right? And I think of the way that sometimes science is communicated online, and someone catches the title of a paper and thinks, oh, the polar bears are going to be fine. So it's really important to be super clear that no, this is important that we focus on climate action, because that's the clear and present need right now.
Absolutely.
Jess, when you're looking at the work that SAFE has done with penguins, what's been your favorite project that you all have been working on?
So the thing that's really been exciting for me is there really wasn't a lot known about the Namibian penguins, and I actually was able to get some funding to take a couple of people from SANCOB up to Namibia and meet with people and really, find out what we can do to help. And there was one person who was a researcher up there who was doing a bit of work with penguins. The local ministry would try and help the penguins as much as possible, but there's a lot of funding issues. So actually we had these meetings, and one of the meetings we had was with a representative from De Beers Mining Company, which is a fairly big company in Namibia. Namibia is big for diamond mines. And it ended up that we just ended up, they were like, yeah, we want to do this. We want to help you. So we're in this multi-million-dollar project now where they're going to be building a brand new rehabilitation facility. And we've just developed a nonprofit based basically on Sandcob. And we're ready to be hiring people on to come start helping with the penguins and rehabilitating them. But it's also a huge concept that we're going to be doing a lot of community outreach and engagement and helping with a lot of other things. So, yeah, it's been very exciting just from asking one question, you know, what's going on up there, that all of this has happened over the last few years. So that's, you know, for me has been the most exciting thing. I think the part that really is tough for us is that we end up feeling like we're always being reactive instead of being proactive as far as responding to the issues with these species. And we can't really get ahead of what's going on to help them out. So, you know, climate change is not something that we can mitigate ourselves. It just, you know, working with those animals in the field, the whole world has to be in on it. And, you know, that's unfortunately, if that doesn't happen, then, you know, what we're doing is not going to be helpful in the end.
If you think about, you know, if there's one encouraging thing about climate change for me, it's if we take action, if the way that people choose to invest their time, their money, their political power is into addressing climate change, we're going to help penguins and polar bears and Greenland sharks and the communities in Alaska and, you know, hundreds and thousands of other species and habitats across the globe. So it's a lot of impact if we can focus and really drive some action. Lisa, what is if you all are looking off into the future a little bit, where can you see this sort of approach that you all have taken with Polar Bear Point showing up in another area of the zoo?
We actually have been having conversations about, we're working on new exhibits. We kind of have one area of the zoo that's kind of left. And we're excited to look and investigate what type of human dimensions we can definitely highlight there. And just how we can kind of do like we did at Polar Bear Point, where the messaging is really built from the ground up, from the very beginning, and come from, you know, true, authentic relationships, so that, again, those messages and those connections that we're able to build with our audiences can then translate to actions for animals and for people.
Yeah, it's so important for people to see themselves as part of nature, part of habitats, part of solutions, and not separate.
Exactly.
And even when you feel responsible for nature, sometimes that results in people thinking like somehow, you know, we're not part of it. You know, it's, you take action
Right.
for nature, you take action for yourself as well.
Exactly.
Bryn, what's next for Greenland sharks? What would you be excited to study next?
I think addressing any of those three questions at the end of the things we don't know, I think generating some good abundance estimates would be a really important next step. I would love if anyone had information on pregnant females, since there's only ever been 2 reported. I think that's crazy considering how much people have interacted with them in the past and still. And yeah, more tracking studies. I think that's something where my research is headed. More tagging, trying to figure out where they're going and why. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, really.
It's exciting to be on the front end of that, right? If you don't know anything about the animal, I guess that's job security, right?
Totally.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. That's all the time we have for this evening. Thanks again to our speakers. You are all amazing. Please, if you can drop some applause emoji into the chat, that would be great. If we were in person, this would be the part where people, you know, stood on their feet and offered thunderous applause. Now, if you enjoyed tonight's science event, please do consider a donation to help keep programs like Lightning Talks free and accessible for everyone. Now, if you're local, come see us. The holidays are a great time to come down to the Seattle Aquarium. Tons of activities and experiences for the family, including diving Santa and New Year's Eve. You can learn more about all of these at our website. Now, our next Lightning Talks is on March 8th. Now, we haven't dialed in the topic, and in fact, you can have an influence on the topics for the rest of this season. So please do put your ideas into the chat. We have some ideas, but we also want to hear from you and know what you're really excited to learn more about. Now, you can see all of our past Lightning Talk events on our YouTube channel. So sharks, orcas, deep sea, seabirds, and more. They're all on our YouTube channel. And while you're there, don't forget to click like and subscribe. So thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great evening.